a Jew. David Matas suggested that parliamentarians keep certain principles in mind when enacting laws, including institutions to combat anti-Semitism. He stressed the importance of effectiveness, that civil and criminal laws directed at both discrimination practices and incitement to hatred was warranted. He argued that free speech absolutism needs to be confronted, and I think we have a tension, as you all know, in the United States with what we call our First Amendment constitutional rights. And that argument and that discussion needs to be engaged as to whether or not and to what degree do we allow hate mongering and hate speech to be permitted. And it's an idea, as Victor Hugo once said, whose time has come. We need to look at that, I think, very incisively. He also made a very important point about when someone makes a complaint, that there needs to be accountability for the complainant. That is to say, they've got to give their name so we don't get slander mongering by those who just, suggest that so-and-so has committed a hate crime. On the seriously important issue of data collection, our group agreed to the overriding importance of systematic gathering, analysis, storing, and dissemination of anti-Semitic hate crime information by a central authority. I'll never forget when Natan Sharansky at the Berlin conference made it so clear and admonished every delegate to go back and gather information. You cannot confront human rights abuse in any category if you don't know the who, what, when, where, and why of that human rights abuse. Obviously, that applies to anti-Semitic hate. I pointed out that only 19 states, when ODIHR gathered information, 19 OSCE states, actually conveyed to that group, that organization, that they had a central authority. It is very important to have one big group. For us, it's the Attorney General, and he has conveyed that to the FBI, who not only gathers the information, breaks it up so it's usable, but then puts it on the Internet for all to see. Paul Gianassi explained the United Kingdom approach, which takes not only hate crimes in prosecution, but hate incidents, defined in pertinent part as, quote, non-crime incidents, which is perceived by the victim to be motivated by hostility or prejudice. We discussed some of the pros and cons of that approach, which we submit to you for your consideration. Obviously, it may actually gather a greater knowledge as to what is actually going on. It also could create a caricature where people are saying without justification that they have been victimized. Again, this is not when a crime actually occurs, but an incident. But it was a I think, very good discussion. We discussed the importance of employing the EUMC working definition of anti-Semitism. And Ken made a very important point, and if you haven't read that working definition, it really gives, I think, especially for the police, an idea of what they're really working with. It's not vague. It gives some concrete examples, and I think all of you, if you haven't seen it, ought to take that home with you. It'll be part of the record, and again, Ken Stern really emphasized that as very important, and I think we all, in our discussions, agreed with that. There was strong consensus on law enforcement training, comprehensive training of police, prosecutors, and judges is essential if perpetrators of anti-Semitic hate crimes are to be successfully apprehended, prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced. Again, a law where the people who have to act it out and implement it, if they're not apprised of it in a way that makes it useful to them and also motivates them, is a law that sits on a shelf somewhere. The OSCE ODIHR Law Enforcement Officer Program is a model program consisting of an international cadre of expert police officers who have trained police trainers. So you train the trainers to go back and train the individual police officers, and that has already occurred in a number of countries. Regrettably, there is a lack of funding at ODIHR to continue this program, and I hope all of us not only look at it, but go back and see what we can do in our respective countries to fund it. Every parliamentarian in our group I think, agreed, and many spoke out, that we need to use the bully pulpit as parliamentarians to speak out whenever anti-Semitic hate shows itself. And finally, during our third session, we focused on the text of the London Declaration, and there was no shortage of excellent suggestions by the members for strengthening amendments, all of which have been conveyed to our distinguished chairman and to members of the steering committee. It was an honor and a privilege to join the legislative colleagues and experts in what was truly a meaningful discussion. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. And I'm now moving to our fifth group, which was chaired by Erwin Cottle of Canada. And may I say how amazing it is, the size and the quality of the Canadian delegation, which far outreaches any other country here. Erwin.
Thank you, John, and I'm delighted, as you put it, by the representative character of the Canadian delegation. Our workshop was organized around two themes. First, state-backed anti-Semitism in general, including statements and conduct by political leaders, government authorities, and government media, and state-sanctioned genocidal anti-Semitism, in particular, the most virulent and even lethal form of anti-Semitism. That was the first workshop and first theme. The second workshop was that of anti-Semitism in the international arena, which included, among other things, the singling out of a member state, Israel, in the international arena for discriminatory treatment while giving major human rights violators exculpatory immunity. We were assisted in our work by a quartet of experts, Matthias Kunzel, Charles Small, and David Harrison, David Matus, whose expertise was such that they rotated amongst different groups, but we had their benefit for when they were available to us. And I want to just mention the excellent work of our clerk, Daniel Bacall. The following recommendations emerged, which, for reasons of economy, I will cite without the benefit of the context, clarity, and eloquence that accompany them, particularly by the exemplary parliamentary group that we had and their timely and appropriate interventions. The recommendations include, and as I say, I will cite them just for reasons of economy briefly, that governments act to cease broadcasting satellite television channels that propagate anti-Semitism and incitement to hatred and terror. Chris Wolf covered this masterfully. I will not elaborate at all. The delegates should read the Hamas Charter into the parliamentary record so as to build a documented public record of the anti-Semitic nature of this document and related documents and covenants which deserve to be exposed and unmasked. Delegates should enact and implement domestic legislation to combat incitement to hatred against identifiable groups. Delegates and their governments should speak out against anti-Semitism and discrimination directed against any minority and guard against equivocation, hesitation, rationalization, and justification in the face of incitement to hatred. As Chris Smith put it, and appropriate to quote it here, that all is needed for evil to triumph in the world is for enough good people to do nothing. Delegates should hold United Nations bodies to account for the breaches of their own charter and principles in the discriminatory conduct in and amongst these bodies. Delegates should initiate equivalent parliamentary inquiries in their own countries organized around the UK inquiry model, which, Mr. Chairman, you and your colleagues have carried out so successfully and continue to do so. Delegates should encourage interreligious dialogue and cultural exchange, encourage school visits by survivors of genocide, and ensure that the media are aware of their responsibility to refrain from promoting advocacy to genocide, incitement to hatred, anti-Semitism, and other forms of discrimination. Delegates should utilize their membership in national and international organizations to address the concerns of anti-Semitism and should promote international cooperation within international organizations